What's up, everybody, and welcome to my channel. My name is Austin Haney, and during the school year, I am an English teacher in China. Now, because of the coronavirus, we actually cannot be in China right now, but that doesn't mean that teaching or learning has stopped. Maybe like you, for the past few weeks, we have been teaching online, and I've been super inspired to see all of the different ways that people have helped each other during this time, shared ideas, shared lessons, shared other things. And so I thought that maybe I could use this channel to help bring some of the knowledge that I have to you, wherever you are. And so if you are a new teacher, you know that you will spend a lot of time coming up with new lesson plans and ideas and things to teach your students. It's kind of just part of the gig. And what I've seen is that there is quite a variety among new teachers. There are some people that like to teach exactly what the textbook has already given them, or lesson plans that past teachers have used in the past. They just teach it just as it is. And then there's maybe more of our perfectionists on the other end of the spectrum, and they like to make everything up new. Before they start planning, they go to Pinterest, they find all the cute ideas to share their class. They imagine room transformations every week, and it's so out there. It would be incredible if they could pull it off, but most likely they're on a way to burnout if they don't find a way to make this pattern sustainable for them. So on both ends of the spectrum, there's some noticeable problems. Maybe there's laziness and copying, lack of imagination and creativity, but maybe there's perfectionism that's driving us to unsustainable results. So something that we need to remember, no matter where we find ourselves in the spectrum, is that our creativity and all of that comes second. The first thing that we should be thinking about when we're planning a lesson is content. So go ahead and remember this. Content is king. Content is everything when it comes to lesson planning. You can have the best lesson that has ever been produced, the most beautiful room transformation, but if the content isn't there, then you're missing the mark as a language teacher. So the question we need to be asking ourselves is, how can we consistently be making engaging activities that also teach content at a high level that help our students acquire the language that they need? So I thought the easiest thing to do would just be to walk you through my process. And the first thing that I always do is identify the objectives. What I found as a teacher is if you don't start with objectives, you wind up summarizing what you did in your lesson as your objectives rather than letting objectives drive your teaching. So I usually like to break down my objectives into two main categories. The first thing is, what do the students need to know? Maybe it's some grammar, some vocab, some background knowledge that will help them throughout the lesson. What do the students need to know? The other thing is, I like to think about, what do the students need to be able to do? So as a result of this lesson, are there scenarios that they need to be able to handle? Role plays, complications, do they need to be able to order a meal for themselves or get in a taxi? What do the students need to be able to do? In other words, what are the skills that this lesson is going to teach them? I've found that the more specific you can be with what they need to know and what skills they need to have, the better your lesson is going to go, because you're no longer just talking about abstract knowledge, but something specific and applicable to their lives. So after I pin down my objectives, the second thing I do is I think about, what evidence will I need to see from each student to know that they met those objectives? Because what I found as a teacher is, if the lesson is not something you can assess, then you're going to wind up spending a lot of time teaching stuff and have no idea whether or not the students are actually learning anything. Okay, so you got to have evidence that the students can actually do what you've taught them. Now, when I mention evidence, I don't mean that you have to give a quiz after every lesson or that you need to have a high-stakes assessment. But what I do mean is, whether it's a role play, or you get some students to demonstrate that they can use the language, or you get them on their homework to do a speaking activity, and you listen to hear them use some of the useful phrases that you talked about in class. Whatever it is, you need a way of assessing what you've learned. And then once you've gone through the two big steps of identifying your objectives and thinking about the evidence that you're going to need to assess it, that's when you can get into the fun part, which is planning the learning experiences. Now, I think this is the area where teachers really have the most flexibility to be creative. And the longer you're in this craft, the more you're going to realize that some of your original ideas were just stupid. But you'll have time to change them and to get some new ideas and to continue to get more creative and more relevant to your students as you grow as a teacher. This is really where your personality can come out, and you can show the students things that are interesting to you or things that are interesting to them. But remember, when you're in this part in the process, still don't forget that content is still king. So I thought one of the best ways that we could practice planning a learning experience would just be for you to plan one along with me. So I've got 2 activities that we're going to work through together today, and these are a good example of reading and writing activities that might come in the middle of a unit designed on character development or plot, or getting them to tell their opinion about someone, or talking about character traits. There's so many ways that these lessons could be adapted, but I just kind of want to show you my process that I'm going through. Okay, so for our first activity, we're going to be talking about what makes a good villain. Now, I think that topic is interesting already because it's kind of a play on words. A good villain? What are you talking about, teacher? So since this is a reading lesson, our objectives for today are identifying a key point in a passage, looking for evidence and examples that support that point, and then taking what they learned from a passage and using it in their own creative writing. To put that in more human terms for you, I'm going to have them read a passage that gives some examples of what makes a good villain. And they're going to highlight the different characteristics as they go, and then they are going to look at a villain in a film and think about how could they change that villain to make him even better. So let's work through this problem together. The way I like to split up my learning activities is in a pre-task, the task, and then the post-task. So in the pre-task phase of this lesson, I'm going to tell the students that we're going to read an article about what makes a good villain. So before we even begin, I'm going to have them brainstorm some ideas of what they think makes a good villain. I found this is super helpful to kind of elicit their ideas and their prior knowledge before you begin whatever activity you have planned. So I might ask them, like, what are some things villains have in common? What are some character traits that many villains have? And that maybe I'll show them a picture of some villains that they would know, and I would say, like, why do you think these people ended up like they did? And maybe we can look at some of the struggles they faced or some of the difficulties that they had, or maybe some commonalities between them, so that we can all get a good picture in our mind of what is a villain and what makes a good villain in a movie. Now that we've got the concept of villain kind of rolling around in our mind, the second thing we're going to do is actually move to our task. So I'm going to have them read whatever article I assign them, and I'm going to have them look for key characteristics of a villain. And since in this lesson particularly, I want them to work on identifying some examples and evidence that support the main point, I'm going to ask them to annotate the article and to look for evidence that supports why this is a good characteristic for a villain, or look for examples that the author uses. This will make it really easy for the students later on. When they're discussing these different characteristics, they'll already have a body of reasoning and examples that they can draw from that they can either agree with or disagree with when they're discussing with their partner. So once we finish reading through the article and kind of annotating it together, circling things, underlining things, connecting different examples, what we're going to do is I'm going to move the students into a think, pair, share time. So after the students have actually finished reading the article, I'm going to move the class into kind of a think, pair, share situation. So I'll have them think about what were some of the key characteristics in the article for what makes a good villain. I'll have them discuss those same things with their partner, and then I'll get a few of them to share with the class, again, just so I can make sure that they're understanding what we're talking about, that they can articulate some of what they're learning, and it's kind of the early stages of formative assessment. Once I've given the students an opportunity to think among themselves, to share with a partner, and maybe even to share publicly a little bit, I'm going to move into the post-task part of this activity. And this is where we're really getting into like the application of this activity. So I'm going to have a few students share like what do they think is the most important factor for making a good villain. Or I might get them to rank what are the top 5 characteristics for the most evil villain in the movies. Or I might have them do something like think of 5 villains that have this trait in common. So I'll get them to really apply what they're learning, but more in a group discussion or a peer kind of way where there's a little bit of help, a little bit of hand-holding if they still need it. And then I'm going to bring them to the real application. And so you could take this so many different ways depending on what you were doing in class, kind of what lessons you were working on. But the application I want to use is I want to have my students rewrite the story of one of the villains from the movies and change one of his traits or some of his biography to make him an even better character. So for example, if they want a villain that's funny and they think that will make a more interesting movie, then they can show how they can adapt the character or the villain to make him a little funnier, and maybe that would change the outcome of the story. Or maybe it's something like they want to change his backstory. So this villain, he just comes out and he's evil from the beginning and no one knows what's wrong with him. But maybe they go and give him a hard life in the beginning, and he always failed English class and he had such a difficult life. And that's why he decided to turn into the villain that all the teachers were scared of. Okay, so kind of changing an element of his story. Again, there's so many ways that you could adapt this for your own needs, but make sure you give the students something they can take and run with. And if you're teaching an oral class, maybe make this a speaking activity. Or if it's more of a writing class, then maybe let them write out their thoughts about this. Either way, give them something that they can go and do on their own. If you're interested in using this particular activity in your class, I'm actually going to put some links down below in the description, and you can just click on those. They'll take you to some helpful websites that I used in planning, and feel free to go ahead and use this stuff and use it in your own class if you think it would help you. I'm going to do my best to continue sharing some videos like this, so if you found this helpful, click the subscribe button down below so you can be notified whenever I release a new video. And with that, I will see you next time. Bye, guys.